Alright, so we're now going to be talking about Erickson's psychological theory. He goes through 8 stages. Trust versus mistrust, which goes from about infant to 18 months, where either the child will develop a sense of trust with their caretakers, that they're reliable or not, which is mistrust. Then we move to autonomy versus shame. So during these years, from about 18 to 3, they develop a sense of control. But caregivers need to set limits and provide opportunities for them to learn. Next we have is initiative versus guilt. This is where we have initiative versus guilt, which is where learns to develop new actions, new play, and you really encourage it as a parent. Industry versus inferiority, which is 6 to 12, which is basically most of childhood. They learn what is supposed to happen in school, they develop competence, and know what different expectations are needed to be met. In Erickson, as they start to enter adolescence, they go into identity versus role confusion, where they try to develop a sense of who they are through the world and understand what their place in the world really is. Next we have intimacy versus isolation, which is early adulthood, where people start trying to get into romantic relationships, or, on the other hand, become alone. Then we start going into middle adulthood, where people want to make something of their life, have their life mean something to future generations. And then the late adulthood is ego integrity versus despair, where they go back and evaluate their life as whether it was meaningful or not, and then sort of go through this acceptance of death. We can relate back to Erickson, this infancy and early childhood part, where contact and comfort, the infant needs physical contact. If you want to take a look at the video, please click on the PowerPoint that is in this current module. Attachment. Infants need to be with their caregiver to develop a secure attachment. This plays long-term into how they will develop. Stranger anxiety, fear of unknown from 5 to 6 months, but it starts to lessen at about a year. And then they have separation anxiety, which is being fearful of being left alone by the caregiver. And this is influenced by different patterns of attachment. The patterns of attachment that are part of this are secure attachment, which is most children. They explore, they cry when left, and they comfort when the parent returns. Avoidant attachment is where the child doesn't explore, and they will avoid or ignore the mother, hence avoidant. Disorganized is where the child doesn't know how to cope when the parent leaves the room. It's not consistent. And then ambivalent is where they can be clinging when the parent leaves, but they don't really care when the parent returns. And the reasons for these is due to how the parent interacts with them. We can further break these down into secure and insecure. Secure is the first one. The other ones are insecure. And most developmental psychologists believe that socialization is primary, arguing that a child becomes securely attached when the parent is available and able to meet the needs of the child in a responsive and appropriate manner. But that the insecure style occurs when the parent is insensitive and responds inconsistently to the child's needs. All right, next up, we're going to look at Piaget's theories. Piaget is one of the big founders and leaders in developmental psychology, specifically child development psychology. So the first stage is sensory motor, which is where they sense the world through their actions. And they can develop this thing called object permanence. Object permanence is when, even though they close their eyes, they still know you're there. This is one of the reasons why peekaboo is so much fun for little kids. Pre-operational goes from 2 to 7 years, and it deals with egocentrism, which is the belief that they are everything. They start doing symbolic thought, where they have symbols associated with their thought, and have mental images for things, so like ball or car. they also start to go through theory of mind, which is the ability to take another person's viewpoint and say, why is so-and-so sad, or why is so-and-so happy? And they start learning more about their language. They start to talk more. They really start to explode at about 2 years. Then there's concrete operational, where people start to think logically and develop real-world skills. One of the big accomplishments is conservation. The understanding that changes in the form of an object do not necessarily mean changes in the quantity. So if you think about it, you can pour something from a tall glass into a shorter, fatter glass, and it doesn't change how much water is there. Formal operational allows one to start working with abstract concepts and scientific reasoning, and this really starts at about 11 years. It really allows us to start going into abstract logic and abstract concepts. This is one area where we really started to advance compared to previous generations. In addition to that part of Piaget's theories, we have part of this cognitive theory of development, we have schemas. Schemas are a framework for long-term memory and how we go through and understand things. So what we can do is we can look at it in two ways. We can look at it as through assimilation or accommodation. Assimilation is looking at a zebra and being like, oh, that's a horse, because we're taking new information and fitting it into that existing schema. But we know that zebras aren't horses. So a proper way would be to do accommodation, where new information doesn't fit into the schema. So the same child who contemplates the zebra for the first time, he will see that it is another animal and learn to distinguish the difference between the two. And so we'll create a new schema about the animals, specifically zebras, to fit the reality of the world. All right, next up we're going to talk about Kohlberg's moral development reasoning. It's broken down into approximately 3 levels with 6 stages. There's a major critique, is that it was more designed for boys than for girls, especially the later concepts. So a young child will go to pre-conventional. Punishment, their main concern is will or won't they get caught. For the second level of pre-conventional is naive hedonism. How will it benefit me? What do I get out of this? The older child goes to what's more conventional, looking for social approval. What will my friends think? The second level, social norms or laws. What are the rules of society that I should follow? Then we go into post-conventional, which Kohlberg claims that few adults actually follow, which is social contracts. What are the abstract reasons for laws, justice, equality? Not just whether or not something is legally right, but what are the reasons behind it? And then for the older, universal ethical principles, which abstract principles are most important. So pre-conventional morality focuses on self-interest. Punishment is avoided and rewards are sought. Conventional morality, people care about the effect of their actions on others. In the first stage, the person wants to please others. At a slightly more advanced stage, the person acknowledges the importance of social norms or laws and wants to be a good member of the group or society. Post-conventional, abstract reasons are used to determine what is right and wrong. It is not based on just the laws, but as well as social contracts. Alright, what's next up is going to be Baumrine's parenting styles. If you recall earlier, we had the different types of attachment, and these can be linked to different types of parenting styles. So the first parenting style we have is authoritarian. Very traditional, strict rules, punish to control. Possible consequences of this is unhappiness or rebellion because people are too tight or too rigid. It does work in some cultures. There has been evidence that shows that it works in the African American black community. The most typical one that will be used, and that works in the most cultures that we've seen so far through the research, is authoritative, which is communication, caring, rules, and negotiation. So being able to negotiate a bigger dessert, Kids learn to make decisions more mature and successful. Because of the communication, that also you can see how it leads to more secure attachment styles. There's two types of permissive parents. There's negligent, which is ignore the kids. Kids are wild, confused, sad, or angry. And then there's loving, where they're indulgent, spoiled, and lack boundaries. And while kids might love this one, the lack of boundaries really creates issues down the stretch for them. Here's a table that shows where each of these parenting styles fits. We've got high demandingness, low demandingness, responsiveness, high and low. And you can see through here where each of them fit. So next we have up, which are called Marcia's stages of identity of development. Stages of identity development. We've got identity achievement, where there's commitment and they get to explore what's going on around there. We have commitment with no exploration. The individual is not engaged in any identity, and they don't base any of their choices on new ideas. They base it solely on the ideas of others. Where they've gone through exploration but have not committed, that's called moratorium. And they haven't made any commitment yet to what ideas and ideals they will hold. Identity diffusion is where they will avoid and have not made any exploration or commitment. And they're not making any process towards it. Ideally, what is looked for is the identity, where they will have explored and come up with ideas on their own and what they value. Now, it's important to note that studies show that teens pass through this in many different ways. And most will eventually succeed in developing a stable identity, but it can be very tumultuous, and there are many routes for it to be taken to get to that stable identity. One of the last things, or the last thing we're going to be talking about in lifespan is Alzheimer's disease. It's a slow decline over many years. It's not abrupt. It impacts both physical, mental, emotional, and social. Memory problems are the earliest symptoms. Now, if you recall earlier, when in this chapter we were talking about ways to protect against this, learning, these can help keep Alzheimer's and dementia at bay for a bit. Multiple possible causes: genetics, environment, diet, inflammation, different plaques. And so they think by keeping yourself active and keeping your brain active and not just sitting and doing it, nothing will be helpful. Also being active, physically active, will help you. Playing sports, going for walks, those will all help out. And it's a major problem for society and caregivers because it's very hard to watch someone go through. All right, that is it for this chapter. I'll look forward to speaking to you all soon.